makes eye contact. Whoa, hey, I'm on. Well, I guess it's time to start. Miss Heather is telling me get on with it, so we'll get on. Good evening. Hope everyone had a good afternoon, a good restful afternoon. And I say restful because tonight I'll be preaching a little bit about Sabbath, which I have found is a topic I don't love preaching on because I don't do well at it, but we're going to talk about it. Let me open this up in a word of prayer, and then we'll sing for a little bit. God, we love you. We are amazed by your work in our lives. God, I stand amazed when I think about what you've done in my life, in my family's life, amongst our people. You have truly blessed us. And so tonight we come before you to worship you because you're worthy of our worship, and we come before you with grateful hearts. And Lord, I ask that if there are some here that aren't anticipating learning from your word, that you would give that desire to grow because of your word. Be with us here as we hear your word preached, as we pray for one another, that everything that's done would be done to your glory. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
All right, we're going to start on page 416 tonight. Living by faith. We'll do all 4 verses.
Everything and all my worry is vain.
page way back to page 11. From what I understand, this is Tony's favorite song, Come Thou Fount. We'll do all three verses.
Gracious Heavenly Father, what a privilege it is to be back in your house. Lord, we thank you for the way you've blessed us and the way you continue to bless us. Lord, how in the world we are, but God, you're a gracious and good God, and you bless your people. We thank you for it. Pray you bless this offering and use it to further your kingdom. In Jesus' precious name we do pray. Amen.
Let's turn to page 444, Blessed Assurance. We'll do all three verses here too.
Purchase of
page 672. And I know I'm going to hear about this one after the service tonight, so I'm going to apologize for it now, Mom. We'll do all 3 verses here too.
All right, who can tell me where I'm preaching from tonight? Exodus. All right, that's a good start. 16, yes. Exodus chapter 16. Michael, I mentioned it this morning. So, yeah, we don't have any prophets or anything like that here. That would be impressive. Oh, hey now, man, all right. Well, it is good to be in the house of the Lord this evening. Exodus 16 is where we are this evening. What I want to do is, well, it's not just what I want to do, it's what we're going to do. We're just going to walk slowly through this passage. I thought it was fitting based on, and you'll see why it's fitting in a moment. We'll get there. It takes a little bit, but we'll get there. It's fitting based on give us this day our daily bread that we go to Exodus 16. The subheading in the ESV says bread from heaven. And as we'll read, God provided his people with daily bread. It wasn't just bread, it was also meat. We'll talk about the meat, the quail specifically, in just a moment. But first, I'm going to read for us verses 1 through 3. Like I said, we're just going to slowly, methodically go through this passage section by section. So Exodus 16, beginning in verse 1, they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came out of the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month, after they had departed from the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So let's stop there. There are several things I want to cover with this first section. Does anyone else just read that and you understand the context of the book of Exodus? And man, you just want to take the Israelites like by the neck and just like strangle them just a little bit. Just I do. It's very frustrating. Yeah, just smack them around a little bit. Like, okay, there's mention there in the first verse when this happens. It's the 15th day of the second month, and if we were to go back a couple chapters before, we would see that they had been released from Egyptian captivity on the 15th day of the first month. So this is a month following their release from slavery. And they are so, this is, I'm sure someone's used this phrase before, but to me, this is spiritual, amnesia. They have just managed to forget in a very short amount of time what God did for them a month prior. And so what they do, they voice their displeasure. They grumble. Now, there are two things about this grumbling I'd like to note. First off, this is a grumble. I think that's a noun, grumble. Yeah, to grumble. Yeah, their grumbling is to the leaders. It's to Moses and Aaron, not to God. So they've already forgotten who it is that brought them out of Egypt in the first place, to place blame on whoever it is that was responsible for this. So they say, for you brought us out, Moses and Aaron. It's also interesting that instead of, you would think if they're hungry, if they are lacking in food, there's no meat, you'd think that they would make a petition. They would come before the leaders. They would go to God even and say, can we get a little help here? Can we get some food? We need food to survive. But no, there is no gratitude, that they are no longer enslaved. Instead of making a request, a petition, they gripe. They complain. In fact, when they mention the land of Egypt, it's almost as if they forgot what happened in Egypt. It would be like someone who is in jail, and when you are in jail, you have guaranteed meals. That's the way that works. Well, you're released from jail, and you start complaining to your wife about the quality of the food. And it's like, are you kidding me? Would you rather be back in that jail cell, 22 hours a day? And it just doesn't compute. But I don't want to get too far in placing blame on them. We'll get to that in just a moment. So they gripe, they complain, they grumble. There are two aspects of their grumbling. It seems as though, based on verse 3, the specific complaint here is there's not enough food and there's no meat. Specifically, they say that they're talking about we would have rather died sitting next to the meat pots and full of bread than to have been brought out here. Now, again, I don't want to be too hard on the Israelites, because how often are we dissatisfied with the accommodations that God has placed in our lives? Oh, Danielle can tell you one of the things that makes me so angry is when my things don't work the way they're supposed to. I can't tell you how many times I get mad at the Amazon Fire Stick or complain about the Wi-Fi because whatever I'm streaming on the television is buffering. What? Like, talk about, was it first world problems? Like, okay, I need to take a step back and evaluate and think, hold on, I have a television sitting in front of me. So I don't want to be too hard on the people of God, because we are quick to do the same thing. We are quick to complain about whatever it is that we have been blessed with, because it's not up to the standard that we think that we are able to have. We're spoiled. I talked about this morning. I won't harp on it anymore. So they grumble and they complain. And in verses 4 through 8, God provides a solution. Let's read those verses now. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily." So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against us, what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." So there's lots of good meat, no pun intended, here in these verses. God provides a solution for his people. Now, God is a gracious God. He is a merciful God. And I believe that in his justice, he could have said, "Fine, that's the way you want to be. You just don't get anything." He could have done that because to punish the people for being ungrateful. But in an abounding amount of grace, he provides them with bread and with meat. And he lays out for them specifically how it's going to happen. Now, one thing that's stated here is he clearly lays out that he's going to do this. And he clearly states this is going to be a test. This is going to be something that I'm going to give you, whether or not you are going to abide in my law. And we'll see in a minute, specifically, there's two ways to look at that. What specifically is he talking about his law? Well, the clear answer is the law that is observing the holy Sabbath, a holy day of rest. But it also has some to do with just the law in terms of being dependent on God by itself. So God gives them this, Moses and Aaron, they pass it along, and in verse 6 they clarify that the salvation that came from God, the salvation from the Egyptians that came from the Lord, will be a reminder, will be brought to their minds as they have been provided for with this bread and with this meat. So one of the things I think that is telling about the leadership of Moses and Aaron is that they continually are pointing back to God. So we see that in a couple of places here. They tell the people that this is what's going to take place. You're going to see the glory of the Lord. But then in verse 8, Moses clarifies when the Lord gives you meat in the evening and he gives you bread in the morning, it's because the Lord has done it. It's not because you grumbled to us and so we snapped our fingers. No, this is something that has come from God. And Moses goes as far in verse 8 as to say, what are we? This is not something that could have come from man. It's not something that that they had ever seen before, just quite literally bread raining down from the heavens. So they're pointing back to God. Now, it's also interesting because I mentioned at the beginning in verses 4 through 8 that their grumbling is against Moses and Aaron. But what Moses and Aaron are trying to do is point them out the flaw in their logic. Because they're saying, in the same way that God delivered you from Egypt, he is delivering you now from your hunger. And so if he is delivering you now from your hunger, how on earth could you forget that he also delivered you from Egypt? So why are you blaming us? At the end of the day, you are blaming God. And it's not as though Moses and Aaron are trying to shift the responsibility off of themselves, but instead they're holding the people of God accountable. What a grave sin it is to grumble against God who has given them and has given us everything that we have. So Moses really is, he's showing strong leadership and holding the people accountable and pointing them to where their focus ought to be instead of where their focus is, which is on themselves and their own well-being and all of that. Verses 9 through 12, let's read these verses now. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling." And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them at twilight, you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." Now, a lot of this sounds repetitive, right? But what you have is God speaking to Moses. Moses, if you think back to even the burning bush, Moses is afraid of public speaking and might have a speech impediment, so he's insecure. So he uses Aaron to be his mouthpiece to the people. So that's what's going on here with some of the repetition of what's being said. Even still, verses 9 through 12, God in his grace provides for his people. We see here a cloud, which oftentimes in the Old Testament represents the presence of God. We will see it later in the book of Exodus. Well, one of the interesting things that just in studying for this message this evening that I found regarding the cloud is because when we think about the cloud, most often we compare it or we explain why God used a cloud as, okay, in the daytime, that's what you can see against the blue sky. And by night, it was a pillar of fire. So that's what makes sense. But one of the commentators that I read after explained also that a cloud would represent a thunderstorm. And a thunderstorm really does a good job of representing the wrath of God. Think about the power. We've had lots of storms in the last couple of weeks. And think about the power that comes from a thunderstorm. Now, not all thunderstorms are made equally, and some of them, they are loud. Others of them, they have a great deal of rain, but you never really hear them. And God works in the same way. Sometimes he has to be loud to catch our attention. Other times, he just sends the rain and we're reminded. So the cloud is, I just wanted to share that with you. I had never thought about what a cloud represents to us and what it represented to the people of Israel as they saw it representing the presence of God. So God delivers them from their hunger. It's the same God who has delivered them from the Egyptians. Verses 13 through 21. This is a longer section, so stick with me here. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp. and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as you can eat. You shall take each an omer according to the number of the persons that each of you has in his tent." And the people of Israel did so. They gathered, some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over till the morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. All right, so there's several things that are really interesting here. First off, the quail, just in reading, the quail had a flight pattern that went over, when they were migrating, went over this section of the wilderness. One of the things about quail, as I studied, I realized that as they are traveling, they have to stop and rest. And when they are tired, there's no pent-up energy that they can utilize to escape prey. And so one of the commentators I read after said it would be easy for a young boy to capture a tired-out quail, because and so it seems fitting that God uses this moment in time, the second month, lines up with the time that the quail would be migrating over this land. So it just makes perfect sense that God every evening is providing for them this quail. As we move to the, obviously this is in the evening. In the morning, we're told after the dew had gone up, the bread appears. Now, we're not told what the name of the bread is. We all know it. It's manna. But the Hebrew word, and I thought this was really interesting, we read down in verse 31 that the people of Israel called the name of the bread manna. And the word for, the Hebrew word for what is man. And so literally manna, if you take the Hebrew word, is translated literally as what is this? I just thought that was really interesting. It reminds me, it's just a very literal, that's what they called it. They're like, okay, well, here's our what is this? We're going to eat it now. It reminds me of, there are some foreign languages that they don't reinvent or create words to describe new things. The German word for a vacuum cleaner is dust sucker. So I thought it was really, maybe you don't care about the meaning of words, but I found that really interesting that the word for manna is, what is this? I just thought that was really cool. Okay, let me move on. So the people have been provided for, and there is clear instruction on what's going to happen to the manna. God says, don't gather more than you can eat. And so there were some people that would gather more than they could eat. But at the end of the day, each household had enough for the day. No more, no less, but there was enough. Now, there were some people that tried to hold on to the bread. They were greedy. Well, God, in his divine way, he caused worms to infiltrate the manna and to make it stink. It was rotten. You couldn't eat it after that. In the same way, about midday or so, when the sun grew hot, it melted. And so they had to, once again, rely on the meat that would come in the evening. It's almost as if God knew what he was doing in creating a reliance on him for the people. That they needed to be reminded, hey, everything that you have, it comes from me. And so in a divine way, he orchestrates how this manna works out. Now, their disobedience to the instruction frustrates Moses. He's angry, but God has a way to teach them the lesson. And so the way I read this is, over time, they figure out, okay, there's no use in keeping it over and storing it up. It's going to go bad. And so the way that I read it is, they disobeyed and then they got right. They figured it out. Okay, fine, God, I guess we'll do it your way because my way isn't going to work. Man, how many times has that happened in your life? It's happened in mine, where Matt's going to do it his way. I've got it figured out. I'm good to go. And God says, no, slow down, buddy. You need to do it my way. I just love the Old Testament, by the way. Like, anyone that says the Old Testament's boring, I'm like, man, there's so much good stuff. All right, let's keep moving. I want to look at the Sabbath now in verses 22 through 30. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is the day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning." So they laid it aside till the morning, as Moses had commanded them. And it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day." So the people rested on the 7th day. Regarding the Sabbath, God gives an exception to the way that the manna functions. He divinely engineers this manna so that on Friday, that's the 6th day, on Friday it's different than the other days. You prepare it, you bake it, you hold on to it, what's left, and you've got enough for the following day. Now, this is something that I struggle with. I've tried to be open about how I don't always do a great job of, by the way, my Sunday is not a Sabbath for me. That's my job. That's okay. But I don't do a great job of cultivating and creating that time at other points in the week. In fact, Jeremy Kraft one time, when I first moved to Columbus, he came and was visiting with me. And he asked me, he said, "Brother, are you taking a day off?" I think I've told you guys this before, but it's still a good story. I said, "No, I'm still trying to get on my feet and everything." And he said, "Well, you're being sinful and you're disobeying God's word by not taking Sabbath." And I was like, Yeah, you're right. So this section of the story steps on my toes some. God tells his people. In fact, this is a commandment, but it's a reminder that the commandments from God are a gift to us. I mean, think about it. God is, imagine if on Sundays you come to church and you go home and you rest. And God makes you. You try and get out and do some sort of work. You try and, whatever the case may be, if you're a teacher, you decide, I'm going to grade some papers today. And then you're looking for the papers and, man, where are they? I can't find them. And God, he divinely removes that that's what goes on here, is the people are like, you know what? We're going to go out and we'll just look. Well, it's not coming. It's not going to happen. Now, one of the things that I tried to consider and think about is, okay, well, why did they go out on Saturday and that morning? The only thing I could come up with is that they did not trust that the manna was going to be sufficient, that it was going to operate the way that God said that it was going to. Yes. And so what do? They're like, all right, I don't really think this is going to work. I'm going to go ahead and go out and we'll just see. They did not believe God was going to do what he said he was going to do. I love that God gives us commands that are to be a blessing for us. We are better off when we take his commands seriously. All right, finally, verses 31 through 36. Now the house of the Lord called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar, put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept through your generations." As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The people of Israel ate the manna 40 years, till they came to habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. An omer is the 10th part of an ephah. Why do we have verse 31? There is a very detailed description of what the manna is. I believe that there was nothing like it. The people of God that read these things later, what's this? They have this description to tell them that God provided something for them that was unlike any other bread that they'd ever had. Notice it's like coriander seed, and it's white, and it tastes like this. It's a description for the people that came after. This last section, I think, is really good. And it could be skipped over, but what happens is God tells Moses, who tells Aaron, fill up a jar, likely it was a golden jar, pretty big, fill it up with the manna. It doesn't say this specifically, but being kept with the testimony meant that it was kept with the tablets and with the rod, the budding rod of Aaron in the Ark of the Covenant. And so what you have are these reminders. We sang Come Thou Fount earlier, and there is a word in there that kind of references an Ebenezer. What you have is an Ebenezer, I've said this before, I think, is a big stone. It's a signpost that reminds you where you have come from and that guides you to where you're going. And so you look at a testimony like a jar of manna, and you remember, this is what God has done for me. Sometimes we actually need physical reminders of things. One physical reminder through my teenage years and very formative years is I was at church camp, and the evangelist, I couldn't tell you what any of the message said leading up to this point. But I'll never forget that he had a jar, it was a clay pot, sitting on the pulpit. And he was preaching about how our lives are molded, and God is the great potter. You can understand what I'm saying. And then he, out of nowhere, just knocks over this clay pot, and it shatters on the ground. And then he pulls it back, pulls something out from under the pulpit, and it was the same exact style, size pot that had been broken, that had been glued back together. And there was a wick in it, and he lit the wick, and all of a sudden you could see light coming out of it. Now, this was very impactful for teenage Matt. And he said, life is going to throw things at you that is going to shatter your life. And the potter can put the pieces back together. So why am I telling you this having to do with a physical representation? Because there were pieces of that pot on the ground. And we were encouraged, all of the campers, to go and pick up pieces of that pot and to take them with us. And I held on to it. I don't have it anymore, I don't think. Danielle doesn't like it when I just hold on to, senseless things that God has used in my life. No, I'm just kidding. She's left, so now I can say this. But there are, and all of us have got sentimental things that remind us of where we've come from and where God is taking us. And we have to look back at those things sometimes when we get lost, when we wander, because they center us. They bring us back to a point of remembrance, and we think, you know what, Lord? You've gotten me out of trouble before. You've forgiven me each and every time that I've asked you for forgiveness. You've saved my soul. And so we have to set up ways that we will be reminded of his providence in our lives. This isn't in my notes, but one of the ways that I have found, and I'm telling you something that I don't do well at, but I'm telling you that I believe in it, and I think it's a good thing. So you'll have to forgive me for that. One of a really good way to have a physical reminder of what God has done for you in your life is to journal. This is something I've done well at times, at other times I haven't done well at. But when you go back and read through a valley, you go back and you see November 3rd, 2017, and that date has nothing. I just pulled that out of the air, by the way. But you go back and you read it and you think, man, that was rough. And then you remember what it is that God did in your life in that moment. We're going to take prayer requests in a minute. One of the things that I enjoy about writing the prayer requests that we take down is I can read back through and see how God has answered those prayers. The lost friends and family, I can go back, and when I see them sitting in our pews, because guess what? Since I've been here, there have been people who we have prayed for that have begun attending and have become important parts of our church. And I look back and I see God's hand in that. So we need to remember those things. Okay, I've got some takeaways before we close. The first is when we are delivered from one situation, that's not always sunshine and rainbows. Like any sort of change, there is difficulty with it. And so the people of God had to deal with and process, okay, I'm going from being enslaved, literally being a slave to another person, to being free, but not quite having the food that I was once used to. I think if we took a poll of the room, we would all agree that it's better to be free and without a little bit than to be enslaved and having plenty. The second takeaway I've got tonight is we would do well to do the things that God has commanded us to do the way that He has commanded us to do them. There is a method to His, madness is not the right word, but there is a method to why it is that God has told us to do the things that He has told us to do. And the last takeaway is what I talked about earlier, about setting up testimonies in our lives, setting up physical reminders. That's a good thing that reminds us of what God's done and also reminds us about what He's going to do in the future. Let's pray. Lord, thank You for this passage of Scripture, and we thank You for the bad examples that we read of people and how they disobeyed. And Lord, help us to be mindful of those things, to allow those warnings to be present in our lives so that we can remain faithful, that we can be obedient, that we can learn from the mistakes of others. We ask all of these things in Your name.